at various ways in which we must come up with a design and architecture of Nigeria that's rooted in our culture. Last week we looked at the issue of ornamentation. It was glorious. Today, all this, the past 4 editions, including the architectural enterprises, happened in the city. And that's why we are taking this one to be the last. That is, if we must practice our culture in our architecture, if we must delve deep into the issue of metaphor in design, everything must be resident in our human settlement. But our human settlement as it is today is worrisome. I don't want to preempt what the speaker is going to come about, but we got to a point in which we have to think on how to reset the urban architecture of the city. Hear my English, urban architecture that we call urban design. That we cannot be operating on a 2-dimension anymore. Even our 3-dimension, which is the urban design, we have to step up to understand what is in the 4th dimension and what is in the 5th dimension. Because in the next 5 years, the whole world will go into the Internet of Things. Are we ready as a nation to package our cities in tune with the global community to operate the Internet of Things? If we must be the leading economy in Africa, if Nigeria must take its position as one of the greatest countries in the world, we need a city that is well envisioned to fulfill that purpose. And today, Oluwasegun Eson has been working on this. First, he's a planner. 2, he's a master he had a master of urban, philosophy in urban design, and he has been working on this thing with the last 15 or so months. That about the issue that if we must redefine tomorrow, today, we have to fiddle with the soul of our city. I will just turn you over right now, right away, to Oluwasegun Eson to let us understand exactly how do we manipulate our city to receive the 4th and the 5th dimension that is going to drive humanity within the next 10 years. You are welcome. Oluwasegun Eson, please.
Thank you, Dr. Tuji Adejumo, for giving me such a privilege to share my experience on what I've been working on in the last 15 months or thereabout, and I'm happy to be on this platform. I will actually like to share my PowerPoint slide so as to get us well on this particular theme that we're about to discuss. Please, I want you to tag along with me as we journey through the theme, reimagining the soul of our city. I welcome you wherever you are listening to us, and I enjoy you to pay attention as we walk through this theme, reimagining the soul of our city. Let me start from the excerpt of Dr. Tuji Adejumo. Says, though the brain box in a car is small, it synchronizes various functions in the car. Inside the brain box, it is unseen program which actually control and perfect the movement of the car. But when the brain box of the car is being removed, that of a brand new Rolls Royce, it becomes useless. The brain box of our city are either dead, warped, wrongly programmed, or malfunctioning. It is repelling much needed 21st century order and prosperity. Designing the soul of each of the city to comprehend unacceptable mimetic essence should be the first step in transformation decision making. We must reimagine the soul of our city to be a greater nation. On this note, I welcome you to virtual series 6 from the stable of Architecture and Urbanism Research Hub. Wherever you are listening to us, I welcome you again as we're looking into what I've been working on in the last 15 months, reimagining the soul of our city. Nigeria is signatories to international treaties, but out of these international treaties, I'm going to just pick up 3 of these international treaties that actually talked about the prosperity of the city. How can the city support the ever-increasing teeming population and provide for the needs of the inhabitants? So we'll be looking at 2 of these international treaties that Nigeria is signatory to. One, I'll be looking into sustainable development goals, which actually look into the urban prosperity as well as removing or taking away the poverty level within the city. The next treaty is the new urban agenda, which is also in line with the goals of sustainable development. And the last one that we're going to look at is the African Agenda 2063, which is a 50-year span that actually look into city and also the welfare and the well-being of the inhabitants. But it must be stressed that these international treaties are looking into important reform layers in order to bring our city into the desired level such that the city will be self-sustainable. Some of these reform layers are the green infrastructure. Now, the green infrastructure is considered to be a subset of a sustainable, resilient infrastructure. Green infrastructure refers to ecological system, both neutral and engineered. That act of living infrastructure is what we see as the blue infrastructure and is commonly associated with green infrastructure in the urban setting and may be referred to as blue-green infrastructure. That is, it is in between the blue and the green infrastructure. Now, we also look at the social aspect, which we call the social infrastructure, is as well key within the contents of the city. Again, green infrastructure refers to human engineered infrastructure for water resources, such as water treatment plants, pipelines, reservoir. Grey infrastructure refers to human engineered infrastructure for water resources and for water treatment plants. Social infrastructure, on the other hand, is actually looking into broad definition of construction and maintenance of facility that support social services. Now, this type of social services infrastructure include healthcare, hospitals, education, schools and university and public facility, community housing, prisons, transportation, railways, and road. And we must not forget that we also have the economic infrastructure, which refers to the facility, activities, and services which support operation and development of social sectors of the economy. Again, the city form is also crucial, and this tells us how these cities come to life. What brings about this city formation or this city form? We also look into another layer of the city, which is urban prosperity. How is the city going to thrive well within the contents of the teeming population? It is very key and it is very crucial. Industrialization is another important aspect of the city, which we must not overemphasize. Again, creative enterprises and knowledge base is also part of the layer that actually forms the reform layers of the city. And lastly, we'll look at the heritage preservation. When we're talking about heritage preservation, we're talking about those things that are identical or things that can be identified to us as a peculiar person or as a peculiar tribe. So we're looking at what are those things that actually give us a character, that give us identity, or that make our city legible, so that we are not going to compare city A with the city B. So these are the reform layers the international treaties are actually looking at, and this is what this international treaties is all about. Now, we want to look into what are the current situation of city in Nigeria. One, as we can see, the city, most of the cities are devoid of orders. There's chaos everywhere, as we can see today. Today, there's this herdsman issue, there is Boko Haram today. All of these are things that are bringing chaos into our city. Then the issue of depletion of ozone layer as a result of emission of hydrocarbon base by reason of our transportation network, because we have more of the marwas and kekes in the city. These are very, very crucial issues that is affecting most of our city prosperity. At the same time, we're experiencing a geometrical progression in terms of our slums. It is now becoming an uncontrollable, and this is eating up the fringes and agricultural landscape. Thereby, we have food security or insecurity, as the case may be. Heritage resources are meaningless to urban regulators and stakeholders. We do not really have regards for heritage resources these days. Why? All of these are things we want to see. Then, depth of planning park systems and absence of green wedges are another major issues that we're experiencing, as we can see from the, let's say, in the last eight years or thereabout, during the tenure or the regime of Babatunde Fashola, is trying to reintroduce landscape within the city of Lagos. Well, I want to tell us that there is this friction between cultural system and ecosystem manifesting in low resilience index, which is characterized by incessant flood disasters and flooding, major disaster as we're experiencing, especially during this time of raining season. As we can see, experience in Lagos and other parts of the city, we realize that we're having a very serious problem as far as flooding is concerned. NEMET in the news this morning is also warning us to take some prevention and measures against flooding, that the rain this year will usually be very, very unusual. Another thing that we're going to look, considering the current situation of our city, is that most of the cities in Nigeria is economically famished with high poverty level. In fact, the UN pegged that the average dollar per head of an individual in Nigeria is less than $2, which means that the poverty level is very, very, very high. And I want to cap it up with urban governance crisis as we experience. We have issue from political arena to stakeholders, and all of these are not really helping matters within the contents of our city. Well, since the discovery of oil in Nigeria dated back 1956, oil has accounts for about 80% of Nigeria's state revenue. And despite these vast resources, Nigeria ranks among the most countries in the world as unequal. And this is a report by the UN. Despite the fact that we have the natural resources for our city to thrive well, we still find ourselves in this situation. Well, the big question then is, what happened? Where have we gone wrong? What is it that we're not doing right? Is it that we have failed to put the round peg in the round hole, or we're putting the square peg in the round hole? What exactly is missing? Is it that our planners are not doing the right thing, or the governments are not playing their role judiciously? What exactly is wrong? For us to understand this, we need to even know what city is all about. And that will take us to another interesting aspect as we define city. Jane Jacobs in 1996 defined city as human. He sees city as human, that it has its own life. That is, a man has systems. Likewise, the city also has a system that makes up the city. As an individual, he used analog that city is an individual with a unique set of inherent genetic codes. We're coming back to issue of genetic codes. Now, another person, K 2017, sees city not just as a living organism, but it's a result of complex layers of region, terrain, people, history, culture that set a code. That's another thing that I want us to look. Now, this conforms with the summation of James, that is a genetic code, but K is now saying this is a code, that the city has its own code that gives the city a peculiar term as a genetic code. In the work of Dema, Artis, and S in 2009, he also sees city as a frame for living quality, which includes the human, the laws, and the place. Likewise, in the world, there is another definition which says city can revert to be an administrative unit or a certain population density. A distinction is sometimes made between towns and city, and the former is smaller. So the definition of cities varies from country to country, nation to nation, but it's usually between 10,000 to 50,000 inhabitants, and later and the latter larger can be about 50,000 inhabitants. Now, haven't we defined what city is? Let's look into the next slide. We want to consider soul perspective. And in this discourse, I'm going to look into soul in three perspectives. We're going to consider it from the religious view, what the scholars are saying about the soul, what the tradition too are saying. Under the religious, we're looking at the Islam and the Christianity. What are their opinions? What do they say about soul of man, and what do they say of soul regarding the city? Then the tradition, we're looking into two countries here. We're looking into Egypt and Nigeria, and that Nigeria, we're actually narrowing down to Yoruba because we have many tribes in Nigeria. Yes, here we are. We're looking into Yoruba view of soul. Soul is interpretation or meaning which is entrenched in Ifa corpus, known in the local parlance as Odi-Ifa. And the corpus that actually says things within the contents of the soul of human or soul of the city is Irosun Osho, the Ifa fast. And that is the fast that we are considering today. The audio of the fast, let me just give you a kind of a piece of iceberg from this Osho Irosun. It says, Emulele òun ni àkọ́kọ́ bí, adífá fún ẹ̀mí nígbà tí ó ń lọ sí ilé ìkósùn, wọ́n ní kó rúbọ kíkú má bàa gbèdè, ó gbọ́ rú ẹbọ ó sì rú. This is an ode. Now, the power of souls lies when it is in the body. And the same thing also go for the city. For any man within the context of Yoruba lineage to understand what the soul or what the soul of human or that of the city is, you must first understand the ode of this Oduifa corpus, because it is therein the meaning and the soul of the city is embedded. The soul influences the body as well as the spirit to determine the character of any being. Human body is tangible, while the soul and the spirit is regarded as the intangible. Now, the concept of soul is seen in the city. It is a common practice for people to consult the Ifa oracle to determine the soul of any city before the inhabitants settle in any city. There are metaphorical consideration for these cities. Like when you get to a city in Yoruba land, there is this common saying, Mate, if you're island, that is, if you're a visitor, they will tell you, oh, Bodo tele bashu bashu. That is, you must not walk anyhow within the city. There are places that are sacred for you as a visitor that you don't go. There are places that you are free to go. Then, they also believed that, oh, gbọ́dọ̀ tẹ ojú ilẹ̀ mọ́lẹ̀. That is, you must not trample upon the heights of the city. So, metamorphorically, they believe that the city has its own high. So, there is a way you go about the city. At the same time, you must have the understanding within the context of the Yoruba that soul of any city give cognition and character. So when you have the soul of the city, it's the soul of the city that defines what the city is or what the city will be known for. And we have so many examples within the context of Yoruba land. For example, there's this popular sage that Toju o ba ti eyin gbeti, ojú ò ní tèkó ilé. Eyigbeti has given a character, a cognition to city of Lagos. Now, the soul also gives essence, which is life to the city. And what is that life in the city of Lagos? Lagos has been the administrative hub of Nigeria until when it was moved to Abuja. But despite all odds, people still familiar with Lagos State or Lagos City as the administrative hub of Nigeria. It is worth noting that the soul of man and the city can be altered according to Osho Irosun of the Ifa corpus. Now, that takes us to another interesting perspective, which is the Egyptian. Now, the Egyptian believe that there is body, there is soul, and as well there is spirit, but intricately more complicated in the light of philosophy of eternal life. And thus, the Egyptians saw the human as comprising various components beyond physical. So also the city. The aspect of human being identified are physical art, name, shadow, essence, and soul. The Egyptians so much believe that for a person to be called whatsoever name you are given, there are 5 major things that defines a man. The first of it all is the soul, which resides in your body. And the second one is your body. The third one, it is the spirit that gives essence to your life. They so much believed in the fourth character, which they call the name. So your given name is unique to you. And the last one is shadow. They believe you cannot run away from your shadow. So all these 5 things are things that make man in Egypt, unlike what we have discussed within the Ifa corpus or Ifa perspective, where their belief is entrenched in the soul, the spirit, and the body. But when we try to compare and contrast within the contents of the Egyptian perspective, we can have that understanding that 2 things are added: the name and the shadow. Now, the Egyptians believed that soul has eternal existence after death and closely associated with spirit and the heart, as it is personal, is double as a key of consciousness of the human. And this is what actually helped the Egyptians to venture into the science of mortuary and embalmment, because their belief lies that when the soul of human leaves the body becomes useless. And it's entrenched in their belief that after 3,000 years, the souls will come back and dwell again within the body it lives after 3,000 years. And as such, there's a need for them to preserve the body, so that when the soul travels far and near, it can come and reside back, and such person will continue his existence. And as such, they delved into science of mortuary and embalmment, because their belief is entrenched in life after death. Now, having said this, this will now take us into another perspective, and we're now talking about Islamic angle. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Quran chapter 71 verse 17 says that humans are created sexually from pairs of 3 things. Now, the first one is body, which is grown out of earthly material, and the unknown spirit and the soul. Looking at this, you see that it is also in conformity with the beliefs of the Ifa and that of the Egyptians that we've just discussed. Ali 2013 stated that the body is similar to the structure. That is a tangible element. It's something that we can see, we can feel, we can touch. It's very, very tangible. And it is likened unto the city. And soul is comparable to intangible character or elements of the city. Then, spirit is identified to the forces of the city. Again, body is an executive tool to carry out what the soul desires, which is will, which is the essence of life. So it is one that tells us, oh, this is good, this is bad. Do you want to go this way or do you want to go that way? The spirit acts like a guardian angel entrusted with the job of keeping the body alive and warning the soul of the consequences of the actions. And same go for the city. So we must be conscious of all of this. So when we try to compare and contrast, we realize that the Ifa corpus, the Islamic angle, and that of Egyptians are saying the same thing, except in the case of Egyptians, when they added just 2 things, the name and the shadow. Now, this one leads us to the next slide, which is Christianity view of soul. What are Christians saying about the soul? Error 2012 regarded man as tripartite person made of 3 parts. That is, for any person or any human to be called man, there are 3 things in the process of the formation. Now, the narrative here points out to 2 distinction sources from whence man created. Well, it's believed that man is created from the dust, and God breathed life into man, and he become living. So when you look back into the book of Genesis chapter 2 verse 7, we stated that there are three-fold nature of man. One, the material. That is, the Lord God took off the dust of the ground. Two, the former cause, he breathed into his nostril the breath of life. The breath of life. And the final cause, during the formation of man, that the man became a living soul. I will wrap this up by saying man has spirit, soul, and body. And the spirit of the believer is abode of God. The soul is home for the mind, the emotion, as well as the essence, which is the will. This soul controls the body, and when the soul heeds to the spirit, who lives in the spirit of the believer, it is renewed and acts in agreement with the spirit. And this takes us to what scholars from different angles says about the city and the soul of the city. I will start with a famous philosopher, Aristotle. Aristotle declared that the soul is not only the form of the animal body, but also in the manner of things. That is believed. Likewise, he claimed that soul cannot be adequately explained in materialist terms. That we cannot talk about soul when we're talking about material. Rather, we should address it within the spiritual realm, in which the person operates. Plato, another philosopher, with Aristotle, they work together, both develop thoughts about duality of man. And it may have come from more ancient philosophy preceding them. But both saw that man as an observer, that is, immaterial parts of man, collapsing soul and spirit into same immaterial. So when we're talking about duality, we're talking about the material and the immaterial substances that make the man. So when we're talking about the material, we're talking about the body. Now, Plato in Republic notoriously proposes that human psyche has three parts. That is believed. One, reason. Two, spirit. Three, appetite. But by using the theories of the tripartite soul, Plato gives an account of how man can be virtuous. And the same thing also goes to city. That city as well can be virtuous. So it depends on the way we apply these rules. Now, this image is giving us a dualistic view of nature of man. When we see that man can be seen as material and immaterial, then when we're talking about immaterial, we refer to soul, spirit. Quickly, soul of the city still defined. Year 2017 defined the soul of the city as a thing that comes from afar, that is not within. It comes from afar and builds the city from the cradle to the finish. Therefore, a city store is not architectural. Architecture is a spoken word turned to design. But we're saying it is not that alone. Neither is a natural character, but an essential and functional character or symbols which define the city, that give the city legibility, that give the city the image. Now, Blossom 2009 considers city to have soul with a peculiar characteristic. That is, the soul of a particular city A cannot be the same soul of particular city B. And within a city, we can have many souls built by its people in order to translate the history of the urban spaces. Again, Fidel et al. 2015 believe that the soul of the city is expressed by the residents. That is, by the inhabitants who lived in the city, to analyze the city distinctive features and define it as a set of physical, functional, and emotional characteristics that influence the residents' relation to the city, and as well as the city distinctiveness. Navarrete et al. Detailed that the soul of the city is the characteristics, uniqueness, and it is inheritance to the identity of the city, and it is well situated in time and in its geography. And that is why city A can never share the same attribute fully like city B. MISA 2017 perceives soul of cities as individual and unique set of inherited genetics makeup. Now, if you follow all along, you tag along with me, you realize that we've talked about genetic codes earlier, and this is another scholar talking about genetic makeup. And this will now take us to another explosive insight of what this genetic makeup or genetic code is all about. Now, let me first define the term genetic code metamorphorically. So the genetic code is a set of rules used by living cells to translate information encoded with the genetic material, which is DNA, into proteins. That is, if we're looking at it from the biological perspective point. What is then city genetic codes? Having understand from the biological perspective. City genetic code is a way of exploring the biological metaphor of the city. And this can be seen as an organic, and many concepts from biology can be borrowed to explain the uncertainty and relativity of urban growth processes. Again, the city transfer its maternal legacy into inhabitants, similar to how human offspring inherited mitochondria and deoxyribonucleic acid from the mother. Now, let's have a clear illustration of this. If any inhabitants of Lagos peradventure travel to, let's say, the north or the east, without the people or the inhabitants of other city knowing it, they were able to say, oh, Are Ekotide, that this person has just arrived from Lagos. Why? Because the city has been able to transfer some genetic codes into the inhabitants, which is now a reflection upon the person who traveled to the other parts of the city. So when we're talking about genetic codes, we're talking about the urban DNA, which is one of the innovative concepts which has been used to describe the unique characteristics of urban and common fundamental elements of each urban area. Again, Ning stated that the genetic code is a blueprint that gives each and everyone a collective core. Let's look at the applicability of soul of the city. Watson 2017 uses the soul of the city to analyze city character. That is, what are those things that make the character of a city? What are those elements? What are those factors that actually give that city image? Santos 2011 applies soul knowledge in reclaiming the road space occupied by an elevated road, by tearing down the road and reviving the river covered by it. That is in Korea. Fidel Etel presents a research definition of the soul of the city as indicator of a livable city that undergo a rapid and drastic changes in the process of urbanization. Again, SOMEC investigation was drawn upon the awareness of the cultural heritage, and closely related to work of SOMEC is that of TAR in Egypt. It focused on place identity in the contemporary architectural and urbanism. Again, MISA seek to understand factors which both positively and negatively influence the development and growth of our city, while K 2017 carry out a study on the soul of Blackburn, considering the industrial memory and urban landscape. So Blackburn, as we all know, is among the first industrial towns in the world. Now, if you have been following us right from the first series of this webinar, we started it with philosophy, coming to entrepreneurship, from there to culture, and that is culture and heritage. Then we also have metaphor, and the one of the last week is ornamentation. Now, within the contents of soul, soul embodies all of these themes that we have been talking about, from philosophy, because we need philosophy to drive the city. Entrepreneurship is to empower the people so that they will be self-sustained and prosperous. Culture and heritage is something that our stakeholders are taking as something meaningless, which is something, is a very tangible and intangible aspect of the city that we can leverage upon to prosper the city. Again, metaphor. Metaphor is very, very key within the contents of the city, so as to translate and understand what the city is all about. There are a whole lot of metaphor that we must understand for us to be able to have adequate knowledge of what the soul of the city is. There is this understanding that we have Alale, and there is a point within the city called the Ojo Alale. That is, we have the city fathers. So if there is need for us to understand the soul of the city, we must go back to the history. And without us having the full understanding of where we're coming from, where we are, it will be very difficult for us to get our desired end. So we must consult the city fathers, and they are the one that has better understanding of what the soul of the city, where we live, they are. Then again, ornamentation is another figure of the city that actually define, brand, and support the city. So when you look at all of our teams, right from the first series to the second, to the third, to the fourth, to the fifth, you realize that everything is an embodiment of the soul of the city. And at this point, these are my humble summation of why there is need for us to use the soul of a city as a tool to prosper the city. It is a tool for stakeholders in the built environment to decide which issue they should address when trying to improve the city. Because if you bear with me that there are several interventions by government, policies, makers, and from every angle to ensure that our city is self-sustainable, prosperous, yet things are not working. And one of the key things that is missing is that we should try and get the understanding of what the source of the problem is, so as to know what exactly are we going to fix in the city and when to fix it. And lastly, soul of the city is a strong indicator to look closer into the corresponding city issues. It's worth to note that city DNA is a function of the soul of the city. In few of these statements, Cities which are equipped with this understanding are at an advantage in the latest phase of globalization. To know the soul of the city is to understand some of the underlying truths which have an authentic resonance. On this note, I thank you all for being part of this webinar series, and we welcome questions, comments, observations, as well as our applicability of the soul of the city.
Fantastic. That is great. You've heard from Olusegun Wesan. He's saying beyond the two dimension, and we call subdivision, or we call plotting. So the three dimension, that is a fourth dimension, and that fourth dimension is where the soul is, the will. In other words, if we want to change the will of a poor city, we must inject prosperity. It's not just about building. We must have prosperity that have the capacity to make the people rich. That means prosperity of Lagos cannot be the prosperity of Maiduguri. Prosperity in Makurdi can't be the same prosperity at Calabar, because each city has their own units that make them prosperous. We want questions, comments, and as I said, applicability. As we move towards 2030, the target point for sustainable development end at 2030. And as we are planning towards 2063, our city, we must not continue the way it is. It must change. And we must rewrite the program that makes a city a city. We must write the program that will make a village a city. A city that people don't have to run away to go and die in Mediterranean Sea because there's no job. Thank you. Questions and answers. And he will answer those questions. Thank you very much.
Theophilus Shitu, you can unmute yourself to ask your question, please.
Dr. Shitu from England, unmute yourself now.
Please, you can unmute yourself
and ask your question.
And ask your question.
Okay.
Dr. Shitu from England.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Olusegun. I really enjoy your talk.
Thank you.
I just have a question, which is, I mean, based on your presentation, you draw out the fundamental thing relating to urbanism, which is the intangible and the tangible. And in Nigerian context, if you look at the intangible, based on our, complexity, in terms of religion, in terms of tribe, in terms of culture, and so on and so forth. My question is, how can we develop an urban theory that will reflect all those intangible aspects? And how do we use those urban theories to develop cities that will reflect, that will respond to those intangible aspects? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Theophilus. The question is very straight and direct, and I will say it in a very simple language that one, like I said, that the soul of the city is a tool to actually understand what is actually wrong with our city system. Now, the theory will be developed just from the understanding of this problem, and we will focusing on the aspects of the city that that needs to be regenerated. the theories are not something that is far-fetched. It's going to be, it's something that we derive from the understanding of the soul of the city. Like you said, that we have diverse cultural tribes within the contents of Nigerian here. Yes, but when you look at all of these things, everything within the contents of soul of the city is pointing to one end. Everything still narrowed down to one end. And from this, we can then pick up the theory, because everything right from the Yoruba perspective, the Islamic view, the Christianity, all of these points towards the same direction. And from there, the theory can be deduced and used to embellish our cities. Prof?
Okay, thank you very much.
Professor Adejumo?
Well, I think you said it all, and the essence of this thing is for us to hear from all of you globally, for friends in England, in Nigeria. They just said what he feels. But the truth is this: in a situation in which we go to Korea to bring a model overnight, without knowing the spirit that directs the city in Korea, in a situation in which we hook our life on Hellenism, not even Hellenism of the 20th century, Hellenism of the medieval era, we're not going anywhere. In a situation in which we jump to Medina because we are Muslims, and we bring what is in Medina to Nigeria, it won't work until we sit down to look what makes Nigerian city. And we now embellish, superimpose prosperity or whatever layer of those things upon it. We will still be where we are. In other words, we must sit down and look beyond the physical into the first realm, where the code is. We must reprogram the city, the brain, like the brain of a car, because the one for Camry is not the one for Rolls Royce. If you go back and bring brain box of Camry Camry to Rolls Royce, it won't work. Each have its own system, but the same brain box. So we must have our brain box, and eventually we want other people to say their opinion, and that's why he put on those emails, because it is work in progress.
There is okay. I have
just wave your hand.
Galazi S8, I would like you to unmute yourself. I don't know your name, but you can unmute yourself so that you ask your question. Please unmute yourself to ask your question.
If you have a question, just wave your hand so that we can attend to you. So send it by text.
So what's your question, Shobi? Or you don't have any question?
Actually, I don't have any question, but I just want to commend your efforts for a good presentation.
All right.
It's a kind of an enlightenment to know what we need to do in a city and how we can actually improve personally, and it will be to the benefit of others.
All right. Thank you, Ma. We so much appreciate that. Thank you. Femi Adejumo, you can unmute yourself and let's have your question.
Okay. Hello?
Hello.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. First, I must commend your presentation. It's fantastic. Then secondly, my question is this.
All right.
For a country like Nigeria, whereby we've grown, and then unfortunately we've grown to emulate the soul, spirit, and body of our colonial master and other civilizations like the Americans and the Europeans generally, how can we, in itself, infuse this? I'm going to use this as an example now. How can we infuse the spirit of Urbanism, things like that, in our city? The thing is, from this point of view, I'm looking at it from this point of view, Yoruba city or Yoruba cities, that's generally the southwest, we have a predefined, a significant culture and tradition. Unfortunately, our cities have gone out of context, culture-wise. How then do we bring in the Yoruba spirits or the Yoruba soul, the design, and then the functionality of our cities, using Lagos as a case study, or better say, using Ife, which is supposed to be pretty of Yoruba civilization as a case study? How do we infuse the soul of the Yoruba tradition into city growth, urban design, and city development?
Well, thank you, Femi Adejumo, for that wonderful question. To infuse the spirit of Yoruba culture into our city is a very simple and straightjacket thing. First thing that we must understand that the Western civilization has wiped off our customs and traditions. Rather, we appreciate the Western word culture, tradition, and we see our own as nothing. Now, for us to have this infused back into our own system, we must accept what is our own. And that is the very first point of call. We must accept our own culture. Now, it is believed that anything that has to do with tradition is more or less diabolical, as discussed in the last presentation when Jegede discussed it, that most of these insignia emblems, when they see them, they actually relate it to evil, voodoo, and stuff like that. The first thing for us is to appreciate our own culture and not let this Western religion delude us from what we have. When we have this belief system in us, knowing that what we have is good, not necessarily having to believe that anything black is devil, as it has been painted over the years, only then we can infuse the spirit of our city, and as such, the city will become prosperous. Like I said earlier on, there are some metaphors that are within the contents of Yoruba, such like Ojo Alale. The Yoruba are very conscious that there are rules, there are norms within the city that you must follow. We have the Ojoba, we have the Oja Keson, we have all of these important spaces within the city where people dwell. But over time, because of the colonial religion and what have you, we begin to see our own thing as they are not good to us, that they are not good at all. But the only way we can have this infused back into our city for urban prosperity is to believe in our own traditions and custom. And that is what we're saying, that for us to be, for our city to be prosperous, we need to go back to issue of culture.
Okay,
and
so
then,
are
you say what?
okay, are you in essence saying that for us to get back the soul of our city, I'm using the example as a case study now, we should sort of embrace, because if we are looking at it from a religious point of view, if worship and if tradition is about the core of the Yoruba city system. So, like I know, for example, now cities like a city in Brazil called Bahia and some other cities whereby they see Ifa as a worship system,
Okay.
where we see Ifa as a subset of what it is supposed to be. Okay. Imagine, or are you suggesting, or are you implying that we should involve or imbibe Ifa-centric designs? That what I mean by this is that now we have insignias, we have obelisks, we have monuments that carries or that puts our culture out there. Is it possible to imbibe Ifa-centric designs into our city system?
Now, Femi, you have to understand this. It depends on from angle at which you are looking at it. You can see Ifa as a religion, but at the same time, you can see it as tradition or culture of the people. And you can as well see it as philosophy. So some people choose to worship that. Then others might just see it as a culture or tradition of the people. So we must not try to mix this up. The Ifa corpus is entrenched the city system. That is what we're trying to say. That is a belief system of the Yorubas, that this is the way our city supposed to be organized. Before any dwellers settle in any city, they make inquiry. And the query is all about, is this place going to be habitable for us, considering certain factors like water, safety? And that is why we have some people dwelling in Abeokuta because of the security, because of the safety. So I am not saying that we should worship Ifa. No, what we are saying is our tradition. Let's bring out what tradition that is entrenched within this and embellish it to drive our system, because the tradition of Yorubas is quite different from that of the Western world. So I hope that I've been able to answer your question, because we're running out of time. So if there are other questions, or if you are not really satisfied about this, please, I will join. I will enjoy you to be with us on Thursday when our panelists will be on ground to do justice to this. Then I have some comments here in our comment section. This is from BO. Is saying, just a follow-up to Dr. Shitu's comment. Why is it that the position of our cities and the people therein are not portrayed in the media or discussed, unlike is the case for city in the West? Lagos never sleep in Akins to New York, never sleep, but the interference with Lagos is negative, while that of the New York is positive. We must begin to tell our own story of industry, resilience, and focus in our city and places. It's a comment. We thank you, BO, for this. On this note, I will hand over to Dr. Tuji Adejumo.
Well, thank you very much. We don't tell everybody. Thursday is actually the day we reserve for question and answers. We have about 5 people coming in, and they will. But the question we have right now, we wish we have enough time to take them. But again, we will pass them over down to the 5 people who are coming in on Thursday to do justice to that. I want to say it's been wonderful here. As I said before, and as Mr. Harrison said, this is a work in progress. It's a work in progress, looking at the way out, how we can reconfigure our cities. Yet, we're in 21st century, but we're not saying we are going back to 1851. We are saying, is there anything good in 1851 that we can use today to be prosperous? We are saying, shall we continue to have a city that has no governance system? How will the governor of Lagos be the mayor of Epe? What do we do? How will somebody stay in Kaduna and he said he's controlling Kafasha? Is that normal? In other governors, in other words, how can we create a job that will keep our people here as again running away? Thank you. We appreciate what you've done. We'll be expecting you on Thursday. Have a wonderful day. Thank you all.